In this video, I'm going to cover the basics you need to know of Photoshop and thinking about Photoshop at the layers level, as I refer to it. And then in subsequent videos, we'll get more into the pixel level. So opening up Photoshop, we need to open up our files. How can we do that? Well, we can just drag it into our icon. We can go to, have to be in Photoshop, File, Open. And if your computer is set to have the file extension open automatically, right, I can just double click because mine's set to go automatically, and there we are. So your main tool is going to be this, the Move tool, and this is where we'll live for right now. And the other place we'll live for right now is this Layers palette. This is the most important thing for us. So now notice right now you have only one layer, and it's called Background, and it has this little lock symbol. So if I went to try with this black arrow to go ahead and move it, Photoshop's going to balk at me and say, you know, hey, that's not it. Now it'll give you an option right now to convert that to a normal layer, and you could do that, but there's other ways to do that. I can right click on this and say layer from background. I can simply drag this into what's called the new layer palette button, and that'll give me a copy, and then I can just turn that one off. Obviously we can't see anything happen because now this layer is filled up here. So I'm going to go ahead, and either way you want to do it, just get an image and do this. So now we're at the point here where I could go move this image. Now when you see this pattern, this checkerboard pattern, that is Photoshop's way of saying, hey, this is completely transparent. There's nothing below this. There's just transparency. And so that's important to know. So as far as then dragging one image to another image, well, let me go ahead and open a second image. So, you know, open an image any way you want. By default, Photoshop will open up in these tabs. And this can be a pain because we're going to want to drag one image to another one in a lot of cases. So all you have to do is come up to this tab and just drag it out so it becomes a floating window. And then I can take my black arrow tool and simply just drag it all the way over to this side. And so now you see I have this image on top of this image. Now if you ever lose the image, now notice my floating arrow, because now I'm focused on this tab, is missing. All you have to do is go over to Window, and you'll see at the bottom of this what windows are open. I can go back and bring that floating panel up. If I want to bring it back and make it into a tab, I can just simply drag it back into a tab. But here we are in this setup right here. So the real power of layers is obviously, well, then we can composite things together, as I'm doing here, right? Adding one thing to another is called compositing. But the coolest thing about layers, I think, are the blending modes and the opacity and fill. These are very closely related. I'm not going to even go over why they're different. Just know that there's times when you use one or the other, but we don't really care about that. The coolest thing right here is this, the layers palette. And the layers palette determine then on the top layer how it interacts with any pixels below it, any visible pixels below it. So I can change this. There's a section here where wherever I choose, so it gives you a preview just as you mouse over them. These are all ones that will result in a darker pixel, darker pixels. You know, as long as the pixels are darker above it. So you see here, this next one would lighten. So anything that's lighter than the pixel below it would lighten things. These are all about contrast, this next section. Overlay, soft light, hard light. These are all just change the contrast levels based on pixels. These are a special set. I forget what they call these. There's a name for these. You know, we don't use these a ton, to be honest with you. Difference is really cool when you have very similar images and you're trying to figure out the differences. It'll actually show you what's different about it. That's the most interesting thing, I think, in that palette. And then lastly, we have ones that only affect the colors of the pixels below it, right? So that's mostly the cool thing. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pick darken right here. Now I've got this, I'm compositing these two images together and how the pixels are used. But then we have this opacity right here, right? And so I can control, well, how much of this layer is going to be seen above it, right? And of course, if I turned off this background layer completely, you have these little eyes here you can turn off. You'll see that we see those transparency behind it, because if this is only 53% transparent, right? If I was to save this as a PNG file, it would go ahead and be partially transparent. And now remember that PNG is the only file type that would save transparency. If I went to say this is a JPEG, it would actually turn this to white. So let's discuss what we do with a file once we have it. Well, first of all, we should be saving often and always. But if we just go to File, Save, or hit Command S, the first time it'll ask you for a save as, right? And you should save any file you start working on as a Photoshop file. So I might call this, right, I don't know, textures.psd, pick where I put it. Obviously, you don't have to, everything will else be default, and I'll just save it and say OK. But now the PSD isn't completely, you can't use this Photoshop file in a lot of context. That's a very specific file type. A lot of times you'll need to export this as a JPEG, and that's really simple. We can just go to Save As, and simply in the format, change it to JPEG. Now it'll say file must be saved as a copy with this selection because we have all these things here, so I'll just save it. Now JPEG is funny because it can be lossy, so you can change the file size, but as you change the file size, it'll make it blurrier. So for this class, I'm gonna encourage you just to keep it at the maximum. This stuff doesn't really matter so much unless you're putting it for the web. So just hit OK, and now you'll see I have it saved somewhere as my JPEG here, right? And it obviously just looks the same. You can obviously save any other format you want, right? So if we had done File, so if we say right here, File, Save As, and I'll save this as a ping, right? Save that, just leave it as is because we're not really that worried about optimizing it for web. Now we know, like when this comes out, this will have transparency. We just can't see transparency behind my thing here. But like if you use it on a web page, you can see the transparency. So that's it. That's really all you need to know about Photoshop and layers. I guess one last skill is to add a new layer, which I showed right here. So there's a just a button right here where I'll create a new blank layer. So now this layer has nothing on it. Now later on when we go in the pixel level, right, we'll go ahead and maybe draw things on it or do whatever. But that should get you through pretty much everything you need to know at this point.